Okay, good afternoon, everybody. Professor Gutierrez here. Today, I'm going to talk about the science behind the sound. So, in this little lecture, most of the stuff included in this video are not included in your textbook. So, all the summary stuff you can just grab from the actual presentation that I'm going to give today. The reason why I wanted to include some of the science behind the sound is because if we're going to learn about music, it's important to also kind of understand like what sound actually is and how our bodies interpret those things and how our brains tell us like the difference between, if you're listening to your parents say something, it's like your brain automatically knows that, hey, that's my parents talking versus some random stranger. Or it's the difference between when you hear somebody, you can hear when they're angry or sad, or if it's a song. Our ears and our minds are incredibly powerful tools, and we're just going to learn a little bit about some of those things today. Probably one of the more important things is how our bodies interpret sound and music and speech. And so you can see this little diagram of, kind of how sound enters our ear and then kind of goes through different filtration processes. And then at the end, our brain tells us, oh, that sound I just heard, that's my dog barking, or that sound I just heard is the sound of a thunderstorm coming. Okay, so like our ears are incredibly sensitive. So let's go ahead and watch this super short video to learn a little bit about how sound travels from uh, external sources into our ear and to our brain. Sorry. How do I open this? Open hyperlink. Check it out.
Have you ever wondered how sounds make their way from the source all the way to your brain? Take a trumpet, for instance. When it's played, it makes sound waves in the air. The outer ear catches the waves, which then travel through a narrow passageway called the ear canal. The sound waves reach the eardrum, which is a membrane roughly half the size of a dime. They make the eardrum vibrate, which in turn vibrates three tiny bones called the malleus, incus, and stapes. These bones amplify or increase the sound vibrations and send them to the cochlea. The cochlea is shaped like a snail and is the size of a garden pea. It is filled with fluid, and the sound vibrations make this fluid ripple, which creates waves. Hair-like structures called stereocilia sit on top of hair cells and are grouped together as hair cell bundles inside the cochlea. The hair cells inside the cochlea ride these waves, and the hair bundles are moved. The hair bundle on top of the hair cell turns these movements into electrical signals. As the hair bundles are moved, ions rush into the top of the hair cells, causing the release of chemicals at the bottom of the hair cells. The chemicals bind to the auditory nerve cells and create an electrical signal, which travels along the auditory nerve to the brain. Different hair cells respond to different frequencies of sound. The hair cells at the base of the cochlea detect higher-pitched sounds, such as a piccolo or flute. The hair cells toward the top of the spiral detect progressively lower-pitched sounds, such as a trumpet or trombone. At the very top or apex of the spiral, the hair cells detect the lowest-pitched sounds, such as a tuba. The auditory nerve carries the electrical signal to the brain, which interprets the messages as sounds that we recognize and understand.
Let's back up real quick. I think it's incredibly fascinating that this snail looking thing that they mentioned was about the size of a pea. Okay, that thing that's the size of a pea is basically responsible for you hearing the difference between like a male voice or like a female voice, the difference between like a tuba or a really high pitched flute. And so one of the big things I wanted to kind of show you about this specific thing is that these fragile little parts in our ear and on our bodies, if you don't take care of them, that's when you have stuff like hearing damage or hearing loss. And that stuff's like once the damage is done, it's not reversible. So it's really, really important to know that when you're going to like a really loud rock concert, or if you're listening to like really loud music on your headphones, you're in essence like damaging those small little hairs that will never be repaired. So it's just important to be aware. Okay, so now that we've kind of taken a look at how sound approaches our ears and how our brain interprets the sound, let's look at what sound actually is. So, what is sound? Okay, sounds produced in the world around us are actually just vibrations in the air known as pressure waves. Okay, so like for example, when I like clap my hands, okay, the the sound of the hands clapping together creates vibrations going out, and that vibration is what we hear as that clapping sound. Okay, if I were to do this in space, for example, like clap my hands, because of the way air pressure works in space, there actually would be no sound, and so usually in outer space it's silent. Okay, and so when we think about like an individual sound, those pressure waves, um, when we record them through computers and technology, they are represented in what are called sound waves or pressure waves. And so one fun way to kind of look at this is you can think of lower pitches as having slower waveforms. So if you look at the waveform right here, it says like the amplitude, meaning like how loud it is, right? And this one means that it's like a louder waveform versus like a softer waveform. So this one, if I were to say like hello, that might be a softer waveform versus if I said hello, it'd be like a larger waveform. Okay. Same thing too. If I were to say in a low pitch, like hello versus hello. The lower pitch was represented by a longer, slower wave, hello, versus a higher pitch would be faster. Now, one fun way that this is represented visually is using the Chrome Music Lab application. So if I go to open link, y'all can do this with me if you want. You can go to the oscillators. Now you might want to adjust your volume on your um, video because sometimes the volume on this one goes a little bit loud. So take a look. So if you notice when I click some of these little icons and move it up and down, the waveforms are fast and small at the higher notes, and they're low and slow for the lower notes. My Zoom is messing up a little bit. Okay, so harmonics are present in the natural world around us. Take a look at how the power of sound can manipulate the water into various shapes depending on the harmonic series of overtones. Not to get too into the overtone series, but just know that every single note that exists, whether it's like a middle C or any note, it also has a series of what are called harmonic overtones, which are basically, how can I put this? They're basically a natural phenomenon that happens when any note is sounded. You can also hear additional what are called overtones um, with each individual tone. Now, one of the really cool things I've seen over the years about the science of sound and harmonics is you can actually see it in a visual representation with some of these examples using water. So check this out. I kind of have spotty internet, so hopefully it works out okay. This is also in the Chrome Music Lab website, where if you play with some of these harmonic games, you can kind of hear what the harmonic series sounds like for a note. And so as you can see with this harmonic series, you can see that we start with a regular note, and then when we go up one of the harmonic series, it's divided into two, divided into three, so on and so forth. So let's take a listen uh, to how this is used in a science application. I apologize. I feel like my internet's a little spotty.
This is your brain when you're struggling to focus.
Okay, so in this first part, this is just a water droplet, and they're going to manipulate how the water reacts to the harmonic series. And remember, these type of phenomenon are natural in nature. This is not some weird alien science or something. This is like natural phenomenons that happen um, with our, with our world around us. Check it out. Okay, so one thing you're going to notice as we're watching this is you're going to notice that depending on what type of frequency or note that they induce into this water droplet, whether it's, oh, let's go back. So the first water droplet that they're gonna show that has just like the regular tone is gonna be just a regular water droplet. And then when they change the note that gets blasted at the water, let's say it's the first harmonic, you're gonna see the water droplet divided into two. And then when they do the third harmonic or the second harmonic, you're going to see the water droplet divided into three, and so on and so forth. Okay. So think of it as, I guess, first harmonic, second harmonic, third harmonic, and so on and so forth. So check it out. Yep. So the number of points on the star drop corresponds to the harmonic being matched. So if it's just the regular one, it's the first one. This would be the second. See how it's divided into two? One, two, one, two. This is the third harmonic. You see it's divided into three. That's pretty weird, right? It's like some alien stuff. Should show this to Joe Rogan. Then you've got the fourth harmonic. Creepy, right? And then a fifth harmonic. And again, these are natural phenomenons that happen in the world. Pretty crazy, right? So experiments like this, like the one we just saw, are done using like advanced technologies to make this happen. One of the craziest ones I think is super cool is the idea of acoustic levitation. This is again, this is kind of outside of the scope of regular musicians, and this is more dealing with uh, like actual scientists. And so they use experiments like this where they will kind of focus like sound frequencies to be able to manipulate matter. And this is some next level stuff I think is really cool. So check this out. So although experiments like this are done on a small scale, imagine the potential like of you could move an entire like school bus using just like frequency and sound. And this is like some space alien type stuff where it's like like how do these ships levitate. I don't want to go down that rabbit hole, but these are some of the conspiracy things that people look into, which I think is funny. But this is actual science taking place, so take a look at this. Acoustic levitation.
Hi, everybody. Our next speaker, Dr. Azir Marzo, moves things with sound. That is,
but you cannot see a 3D sound hologram. However, as we have mentioned, sound will have the power to push the particles. So these 3D sound fields that you create, you will not be able to see them, but they will be able to manipulate the particles. So this is just a very brief intro.
Yeah, and so they're using just sound pressure waves to like physically move like little globs of paint or whatever. But again, imagine this on a larger scale, and this is why kind of the cool parts about science and sound are fascinating to me, is that like we can do incredible things like that. And when we say like, oh, music is just it's not important. But if you take a step back and think of, what's the power of sound and the power of music, we get into some pretty incredible phenomenon. Okay, which is greater than like, do you like or dislike a song? You know what I mean? So there's interesting things to think about. I also wanted to include this because this is also super important for like just the health and safety of you and protecting your hearing. So this is actually a decibel level comparison chart. A decibel is basically the loudness of a sound and how it's measured. And so decibel is the name of a last name of a scientist that kind of coined this chart, which kind of lets you know like safe levels of hearing for different things. And the reason why this is important is because let's say you work in construction or you work in a job that has a very high like sound environment, like you work like in a factory or in an airport. And this is just important to know because if you're overexposed to these high levels of volume, you can lose your hearing. And again, if you're working in an environment like that, it's just important to know in case one day you lose your hearing or you have some hearing loss, you're going to want to get, workers' comp or whatever to be able to be compensated, because your employer should be either protecting your hearing if you're in a high volume work environment, or if you're an employer and you have employees that are working in a high decibel working environment. It's just important to know so that way you don't run into a lawsuit one day. And so this is from Yale University. This is basically a chart that shows, to a regular common person, just some different levels of safe hearing to be aware of. So our threshold of hearing starts at a 0. So that's like, us hearing the wind or something. Okay. Um, at 20 decibels, that would be compared to a quiet, natural area with no wind. So maybe you at the park, but it's like a park that is pretty quiet. There's not a whole lot of birds and not a whole lot of sound. It's just kind of silence, right? A human whisper is at 25 decibels. So that's already kind of loud. Um, let's keep going. So even just your refrigerator like humming at night is at 55 decibels. Okay. A vacuum cleaner. This is kind of where we start to get to the level where like pets start to get scared and freak out, right? So vacuum cleaner sound is at 75 decibels. This one was interesting to me. When we like are talking on the phone on our cell phone, that's actually at 80 decibels. That's quite high. So the level at which sustained exposure may result in hearing loss, 80 to 90. So when we are using our phones constantly, Or if you're like me, I kind of have some hearing loss, so like it's hard for me to talk on the regular phone, so I have to use my earbuds so that way I can hear the sound like directly, instead of me having to use the phone. Because normally when I use my cell phone, it's very difficult for me to hear using the earpiece, and I usually have to have it on speakerphone. Even if it's on speakerphone, it's hard for me to kind of understand people sometimes. And so I have some hearing loss, and that's why I'm kind of advocating to you all. It's important to learn about. Okay. And then a Walkman. For those of you that don't know what a Walkman is, if you're too young to know, it's like an iPod. Okay. So when you listen to your earpods, that's at about 94, which is higher than what's deemed like safe before hearing loss. So like if you're one of those people that listens to your music all the way on full blast, just know that you are in that category of getting into the hearing loss. Okay. And then obviously as it gets louder and louder, like you have a jet engine at 100 feet away, that's significantly loud. And that's why you see those people on the trackways that have the hearing protection. And this is important because if you look at OSHA, if you're not familiar with what OSHA is, they're basically responsible for like health and safety for occupation. So it's important to know your workplace noise levels, right? So if you're constantly around like fighter jet engines and stuff, and you're not wearing hearing protection, you're going to be you're going to be losing your hearing pretty fast. Okay. This was important to me because when I worked in the band world as like a marching band drumline person, that's when I was a young teacher, I never wore hearing protection when we would go to like football games or drumline contests and all that. And like years later, I realized, man, OSHA or the school districts really should implement like safe listening policies, or at least offer like earplugs and hearing protection, because all of the employees that are around that, they're exposed to those high levels and can have hearing loss, right? And that's like, I'm surprised no school district has been sued or anything like that over that, because when these teachers are exposed to these high noise level workplaces, the school districts nor OSHA are really doing anything about that. And so usually it's up to the teachers to kind of implement like, hey, I'm going to wear hearing protection because I'm going to protect my own hearing, whether OSHA or the school district does anything about it. So I thought that was interesting that like, I'm surprised there haven't been more lawsuits about that. Let's keep going. Almost done. When we have an individual note on whether it's a sound on a piano or anything like that, each note has what's called a frequency or cycles per second. So for any note that emits and radiates, it has a frequency that spins at a consistent cycle per second. And that's how we're able to tune or change notes, is that if I have one note is spinning at a specific cycle, let's pick a4, so it'd be 440, right? If it was spinning at a certain cycles per second, um, if I slow down or speed up, that changes the note. So you can see that if you go to the oscillator thing again. I apologize if there's a lag on my computer. So check out the frequency value at the bottom. You'll notice that when I raise the pitch up, the number will increase. And if I have a lower pitch, the value will decrease. And so depending on what speed or cycle you're going for, that changes the frequency number. If one of the two sounds, sorry, every sound vibrates at a certain frequency, and when two different sound sources match frequencies, we as humans perceive that as sounding in tune. Now, one important phenomenon is that these type of perceptions are for humans specifically. So like they did an experiment with like two monkeys, and they were like, okay, let's do two notes that are exactly matching and then two notes that are slightly off? Can the chimps like understand what being in tune sounds like and what not being in tune sounds like? And they found that chimps were not able to identify and they didn't have a preference. Versus here, as humans, if you were to play two notes that sounded in tune and two notes that were not in tune, we as humans are able to identify this is the one that's in tune and this is not the one that's in tune. So just know that this is for humans specifically. Okay. Coming to the end. Again, I'm not a brain cognition expert, and so I just wanted to include this little picture that kind of shows like a couple of different areas of the brain that become active when engaging in music. So you have parts of the brain that connect both sides. You have parts of the brain involved in movement, dancing, and playing your instrument, right? You also have parts of the brain that controls behavior. Like if I want to express a certain emotion in the piece, that part of my brain is engaged. What else? Analysis, right? So let's take a look at this really, really short video of them doing a brain scan on very famous opera singing. Let's see what we find. Again, I apologize if there's a lag on my computer.
I noticed research coming out about the fact that music has been discovered to be in a lot of parts of the brain, and therefore it engages so much of us.
It's an exciting time in neuroscience where we're beginning to understand how the brain interacts with the environment, and music is a really important part of the environment. And we're starting to learn ways in which music can influence all kinds of other aspects of one's brain function, and especially how we could use that information to use music therapeutically in an even more powerful way. This initiative aims to bring together communities that haven't necessarily gotten to know each other that well yet. The neuroscientists and the actual composers, performers, musicians who have the full grasp of the power of music and the variety of different styles.
Renee, thank you so much for coming in to do this experiment with us today. Could I give you a tour of some of the parts of the brain we might see activity in? So this is one place we'll look for activity in your scan. It's the part of your brain that we call the motor cortex. It controls everything in your body. When you're singing, you're also speaking. And so we're going to look for activity in some of the parts of your brain that are important for forming speech. This one here is called Broca's area, and there's another one farther back called Wernicke's area. You know, if you have injuries in either one of these parts of the brain, then you can't form normal speech. So this is the auditory cortex. There's a spot near the middle where the information sort of starts, and then as you move outward, it's processing the information more and more. I think we're ready to get you set up in the scanner.
Great.
Ready to go?
Yeah.
All right, let's do it. We're gonna start our first scan.
We're starting to learn ways in which music can influence all kinds of other aspects of one's brain function, and especially how we could use that information to use music therapeutically. What does the brain look like when somebody is speaking? Okay, there's certain parts that are lit up. What does it look like if they're performing music? Other parts lit up, you're using more of your brain. If we could learn from that about how to fully empower people to use that creative talent that we're all born with, but oftentimes gets kind of pushed to the side by daily activities, I think that would be pretty amazing. And maybe this project can help with that.
Yeah, and so as you can see, a lot of the cutting edge academic research with music actually is like a cooperation with a lot of the science and medical community, simply because in the music department and their research, they don't have access to a lot of these technologies, and two, they don't know how to use them. And so a lot of the most groundbreaking music research is really a cooperation between other disciplines as well. Almost done. Last but not least, let's look a little bit about brain cognition and music, but with like infants and babies. Okay, so the only one that I'll post, there's like several articles and research specifically about infant and fetus and child brain cognition and music, but I'm just gonna show one. Okay, so the one that I think is the most popular is this study which basically coined this term called the Mozart effect. And the Mozart effect was based on a study that suggested that fetus or pre-birth listening to classical music over an extended period of time during pregnancy had improved brain cognition and performance versus fetuses that did not. Now, this was like a really big topic in the music education advocacy world for many, many years, until eventually this became so big that a lot of scientists were like, hold on, before we use this as like our flagship music advocacy study, let's retest this several times and really make sure that this is actually true. And what they found out was that after retesting, the academic community actually wound up debunking this phenomenon or proposition that making your children listen to classical music improves their brain cognition. So let's watch a quick little video that just kind of goes through that.
Walk around any barrio and you'll find lots of small businesses just like El Mercadito.
The Mozart effect was demonstrated a number of years ago, showing that when adults listen to 10 minutes of a Mozart piano sonata and then are given some paper and pencil spatial reasoning tests, they do significantly better on those tests compared to adults that did not listen to Mozart, but instead either sat in silence or listened to a relaxation tape.
This made it.
Now, just before we go further, just note that they've done this Mozart effect with several different age groups.
Big splash.
And it became popularly understood as listening to Mozart makes you smarter.
The Los Angeles Times coined it the Mozart effect. It was not a scientist who did that. It was a journalist who probably wanted to sell a bunch of papers, and, no offense to journalists, by and large, but that one probably should have made a better decision. This thing about the Mozart effect just caught on, and it really had nothing to do with Mozart. In fact, the claims in the original paper had very little to do with Mozart. They just happened to choose a Mozart sonata. If they had chosen a Beethoven sonata instead of a Mozart sonata, we'd be talking about the Beethoven effect right now. It's totally an artifact of science journalism and trying to sell a bunch of papers. But sometimes science journalism can go wrong, and it went wrong there. And it turned out to be sort of hogwash. The effect was disproven about 10 years later by a psychologist at Toronto named Glenn Schellenberg.
And he did 2 studies that I think really show that the Mozart effect, while it does exist, it's not because of listening to music.
It was an effect of mood. So anyone who was in a better mood did a little bit better on this task. The Mozart effect kind of lived on in another iteration. And
so as you can see, it's important that you retest some of these concepts or propositions of, if you're going to say this equals this, then you got to be willing to have that retested. But anyways, I just wanted to show y'all a couple of these really cool music phenomenons that you may or may not have heard about, which kind of explain a little bit more about the science of sound. See you all in the next lecture. Thanks.